Welcome to this guide for new players who want to learn EU5. And the reason I'm calling it a guide rather than a tutorial is that there's already loads of tutorials out there. And while they're incredibly helpful, given the very steep learning curve of EU5, it's very difficult for a new player, and I know this from personal experience, to fit it into the relationship of your first game. And one thing I will say is be very wary of tutorials who say to teach you how to play the game. And because you are trying to replicate what they're doing, the random nature of the game throws up problems. That is probably one of the first mistakes I made. So this is the reason why I'm actually making this guide. Now, a bit of my background is that I'm a completely new player to EU5. I literally started learning 2-3 weeks ago. I've got less than 40 hours in the game. And I would put myself as someone who's just climbed the lower foothills of that very steep learning curve. And I thought, well, what I want to do is share my experience and kind of give you an idea of what you're looking for in order to be able to play the game. And the first thing I feel that what you need, given the complexity of the game, is a strategy. And by a strategy, I mean setting out objectives of what you want to learn in your first game. Because I'm going to be completely upfront. Your first game, you're going to be lucky to survive beyond the first 100 years. And despite how much prep you've got, because there are so many subtle mechanics in that the mistakes you make in the first, say, 30, 40 years start to accumulate. Eventually, you will get to a point where you're trying to fix problems which you've created in the beginning of the game. And that's the point where you need to be completely realistic that you are not going to start and play all the way through to the end. So what you're looking at is just building that foundation, which you can then go back. You can play the same country over again and correct your mistakes and just build that foundation up at time. Now, by building a foundation, I think the first objective of the strategy is to play enough so that you're familiar with the basic mechanics and, more importantly, the very complex UI. Now, that gives you the tools to go back to the tutorial. And what I ended up doing is when I got one of these tutorials where someone was going through specific features, I was watching the tutorial. I had my game open. That's my Holland game. And I was pausing the video, going back and looking at what is in my game. And that gave me two benefits. One, it helped me understand the menus because I picked up quite a lot of different options within the menus that I wasn't aware about. And more importantly, it gave me that ability to look and say, yeah, well, that's where I'm making the mistake. I didn't consider that early enough. And this is why I've got this problem. So that's the first element of the strategy. The second element of the strategy is to ignore markets and all the trading side of the game. It can be automated. I'll talk about that later on. The second thing is don't worry too much about getting too wrapped up in all the warfare. The warfare in its own way is relatively straightforward after you've fought a couple of battles. But and one thing you do want to avoid is all the in-depth mechanics to do with warfare. That comes at a later stage. So the real objective of what you're looking for is to become familiar with the basic mechanics of the game. And that comes down to managing your production and something called control, and also your estates. That will make sense once you get into the game as well. And also understanding the importance of some of the diplomatic and parliamentary mechanics, which give you an edge in the game. Now, I'm aware that none of that means anything if you've never played the game or you've only looked into the game. But that's the area you need to focus on. And that's the area which I didn't really focus on when I started out. And it got me into all sorts of trouble. Now, as for the length of your first game, as I've already mentioned, you'll be lucky to get to the first 100 years. And what I would say is you need to play enough so that you're comfortable with the UI. Secondly, you're comfortable with managing the basic mechanics of what you could call the day-to-day mechanics, especially being able to have some understanding that when you get the random events pop up, you know the consequences of what option you are selecting. And also, with a bit of luck, you get into a simple war, so you can learn the basics of warfare. And that involves making casus bellis. And then, more importantly, you need to be playing long enough to experience the Black Death, because the way people talk about the Black Death is though it's some terrible thing, and it is pretty devastating to your economy. You need to play through the Black Death, and more importantly, don't give up when everything goes wrong. Try and recover your economy, because that is going to be a very key element of the game. I've said this isn't a tutorial, but there's a couple of settings that I want to share with you guys, because they are quite important. One is the interface, and this is one that you'll find in many tutorials. And what it is the tooltip mode. Now, the default is timer lock. Now, if you're okay with that, and what I found is with the multiple nested tooltips, it's easier to switch that to an action lock there. And the second one is in controls. And this is one, if you're a bit like me, who get a bit over enthusiastic with the mouse, given that the UI is all the way around, what you want to do is turn off mouse pan. And the reason for that is that one problem I had is that you hit the end and then the whole map shoots over to one side, which can be really irritating when you're trying to learn the game, because it suddenly disorientates you. So I'd strongly recommend, unless you have got rock solid control over your mouse and can hit all these very small kind of icons around the edge of the screen, that you actually go in there and turn off the mouse pan. There are a couple of other settings which you can pick up, but those are the two key ones I would strongly recommend for a new player. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to go in and show you the country we're going to play. What you'll find is you'll get this. As a new player, I strongly recommend that you play with a recommended country. And what you do is you get this map here. Now, the country I'm recommending for a first playthrough is actually Holland. I know there's lots of videos saying, start in Castile and Hungary and various other countries that aren't even in this area here. The reason I'm suggesting Holland is that to get your head around the mechanics and understand them, you've got to work at a relatively small scale. And to be honest, working with these large countries, you may think, wow, I have a nice big economy, but because of the control restrictions, you're working on an area in these large countries like Castile or Hungary, similar to what you've got in Holland. And this is the reason why I'm saying that Holland is a very good first playthrough game. Now, one thing I will say is that you're not there to learn the economy. As I've already mentioned, you're there to learn the basics. And the other reasons, there is an opportunity to understand a little bit about subjects, because Holland has a fiefdom called Freeland, which you can learn how to integrate. And more importantly, there is a relatively easy war in Holland where you can attack Utrecht. And by attacking Utrecht, you get a chance to fight a very simple war with one army against somebody who you should be able to beat. And if you can't beat them, if you remember to drop a save before you actually do it, you can go back and practice. Some of these other countries, when you get a war, you suddenly get loads and loads of armies. And for a first actual war, they get very, very complicated. Now, one final point before I click play. The game comes with a fairly comprehensive walkthrough, which as a new player, I would strongly recommend you do. Now, I've done that walkthrough twice. And what the format for this video is that I'm going to go through that walkthrough again, but I won't do it step by step. I will skip over it and I will stop at what are points where I've just to talk a little bit more about the concept. So at this point, what we're going to do now is we're just going to click the play gap button, and I will see you once we actually go on the game map. So here we are. We've now arrived on the map, and you can see this is the opening screen of the walkthrough. One thing I didn't mention as part of the intro is that the actual save game option while you're doing the walkthrough is disabled. Therefore, you need to do the walkthrough as a single session. And I would allow roughly up to an hour to go through it in careful detail. I would strongly recommend that you don't rush through this just by clicking the screens. It pays to just spend a little bit of time reading what the game is actually telling you about. As I previously mentioned, I'm not going to go through the whole walkthrough. What I'm going to do is click forward and stop at key points which I want to talk about. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to move forward, and I'll see you at the first talking point. And this is the first talking point, which would be very easy to click over. What this is doing is it's starting to introduce the main game concepts. But the line I want to draw your attention to is, says in EU5, we play as the spirit of the nation, an abstract representation of your country. And this is very important, especially if you come from a RPG background or if you've played Crusader Kings 2 or 3. It's very easy to start getting invested in your leaders. To be honest, that they're important for the day-to-day running of the economy, but they're not important from a real dynastic point of view, simply because the way to look at it is that you're acting as some kind of a mortal vizier or advisor that runs the country on behalf of the crown. So the rulers will come and go, and with the Holland start, that's quite quickly. So just be aware that you don't get invested in the your actual royal family. So what we're going to do now is just move forward, and I'll see you at the next talking point. Welcome back, and what we've got is we've clicked through lots of the introduction to the interface. We've now got to the economy screen, and what the walkthrough is going to do now is give a certain amount of recommendations, which I'm going to click through and talk about as we go through. So if we click next here, you can see they talk about the balance. We'll just skip through that. And now we're moving on to taxes. Now, this is very important to understand with respect to this game, is your income comes from primarily two sources. That is the taxes you collect from the estates. These estates are these down here, and it runs from the, we could call the aristocracy, the church, the merchants, and then at the bottom you've got all the peasants. And it's the taxes which you collect are going to be a key part of your income. Don't worry about selling food, that's not inconsequential. You get some from diplomatic from your vassals. You can see we're getting a little bit of an income from Zealand. And then of course there's another one on here which is income from trade or profit from trade. Now if I click here, what they will talk about is the taxes, and it says now automate all the taxes in all your estates. Now the automation button is here. Wherever you see this in any of the menus, that means you've got an automation option. This isn't for a new player. What I've noticed is that virtually all players play with this automated. The reason for that is unless you're really into low-level micromanagement, you'd have to stop every month to readjust these, because the amount you can tax your various estates or groups of people, if you want to look at it that way, can vary according to what's actually happening in the game and the way the power is shifting. The key message from here is your income comes from taxes, not from profits. Even though you will build buildings, you do not get the profits from the buildings themselves. So the next thing we're going to do is just click on to see what the next stage is. It says move the minting slider. This is a way that you're basically making your own currency. And what you do is you move up, and you can see it turns red. This is another bit of income you can get from your coinage. So we're just going to click on next, and you can see here it says hint, trade hint, and food hint. This will give you more. If you click on these hints, it will give you more information on the way you can make money from food and trade. And then it says unpause, let the game run for a month, and I'll see you once we get to the next area of interest. Well, welcome back. We got to the next talking point. What I didn't explain, which I should have done, is the reason that you had to play on for a month is the fact that the game updates on a month. It's not a continuous update. So when you make changes, like with various bits which affect the economy and various other attributes, you need to allow the game to roll over and update. Now we've now got to a section here which is, I will be completely upfront, caused me a certain amount of confusion when I first looked at it, because it's called estates, but it's really the kind of the population and the powers that are associated with those tax bands that I was talking about earlier. So if we click forward here, it says the crown is at the top. This represents the royal family and crown power. Now it's important not to confuse crown power, which is down the left hand side and comes up to 100%, with the satisfaction and on this side. The satisfaction is this area here, and what you need to do is make sure all these people, all the various groups are satisfied, and not, because if they're not, and this is reflected up here, they can give you debuffs. Now, well, the important thing to remember is that you can't go above the satisfaction and equilibrium. If you are, then it will trend back down towards that in equilibrium slowly. This is the reason why these across the top here, don't be too paranoid about the actual numbers if it's dropping down. The important thing is that it's not below and rising upwards. So we're just going to click on the next bit, and what this is talking about, the estates and the estate satisfaction. So here, and what it says, privileges. Now this is a mechanic where you can grant privileges to each one of your various groups. Now the mistake I made in my first playthrough is I got a bit carried away with the privileges. Whenever you change a privilege, I don't know if this will show it, says here social classes. So this is the social classes I was talking about. Whoops. Okay, I've just skipped over it. If we go back to and reopen the estates again. Yeah, what you need to do is if you change these, so say for example, well, there's one that I would change anyway quite early, which is common militias. And what you see is that here it shows increase in happiness, but it also shows a shift in power. Now this is a percentage of the current power. So if we click that, and it would say confirmation. So what we've now done is added this. The reason why this one is a must at the beginning, because it increases the sizes of your levies. But because you've increased the actual power of the Boron, because you can see 50% of 4% is very small, where 50% of the aristocracy is a big proportion. And one thing you do need to be aware about, the crown power, as it says here, you really need to be above 25% to be able to avoid any debuffs. So be aware of that, but at the same time, don't go overboard and try and get a lot more. Anyway, I think that's enough of here. So we're now going to move back to where this is actually going. Yeah, it says privilege to the Boron. Welcome back to the next thing I want to talk about. And this is not so much what they want to talk about, it's the way I want to kind of talk about things. And I think it's quite important to understand is that on the map, right across the whole world, is the smallest subdivision of land is the location. Now, every single location in the game has what's called a resource or RGO, it's resource gathering option. And there are literally hundreds of these. And it's very important when you first come in, is that you look around and actually understand this. Now, even an urban area like here, because we said we had to click on Den Haag, has got one. But if you click on Leiden here, Leiden will have one, but that's a rural area. And that's the demarcation between urban areas and rural areas. Now, if you have an urban area, you get these buildings built here. Now, so it's important to be aware that these aren't the ideal trading one. These are a selection of what you could call starter buildings for your urban area. But don't worry about whether they're profitable or not until much later in the game. And I'll talk about that once we get through the actual walkthrough. So if I click here, and what you see is this is now talking about the RGOs, which is this up here. The nice thing about RGOs is that they don't need to purchase anything to actually produce something. So effectively, they are the lowest tier in the production chain. I use the term production chain in a very kind of specific way, which I'll talk about once we finish the walkthrough. What this is now doing is talking about the location-based taxes. This is, I shouldn't worry about too much. It's better to play the game and to actually understand how this goes. And I think that's all I need to talk about now. Oh, yeah, what we got here, an overview picture of how this system actually works. What I recommend is if you can take a screenshot and then store it somewhere where you can see it, it's a very good visual guide to how way things actually work. And what you've got here is you've got the buildings in your urban areas, your RGOs, which are all across all locations. What these do is they employ POPs. And you can see down here that there's all the population that is required for each line across the screen. And of course, what it does contribute is to what your tax base is. Now, the tax base is the taxable income, well, which you can be entitled to. But quite often in this game, due to other mechanics, you will not get the full tax base. In fact, if you come down here, what you will see is the tax base. you get the actual tax base, which was 6.74. Because we're in the capital, we get the full tax base. And right at the bottom, you'll see that the actual tax we get from Den Haag is 1.92 ducats. And what that does is that taxing goes into the actual estates. If you come back to here, you can see how the estates are actually taxed in Den Haag and who's giving you the money. You can see in the middle there that the priest, because it's a Catholic country, the priests don't pay taxes. And then what you can see here coming out here, it says it provides taxes and your levies. Managing your environments is quite a big thing to actually go to kind of consider as you go forward. And I think that's all we really need to say about that. So what I'm going to do now is click through to what is probably one of the most important concepts in the game. This is control. The whole game rotates around control. And if you come here and you can see it's this green key here. And in your capital, you have 100% control, which means you get 100% of the benefits. What you get now is what's called proximity to the capital. And of course, this is the capital, so it's 100% proximity. Control and proximity has a very big factor on how efficient your economy is. So a key part of what you will be doing throughout the game is building up your control or your proximity, which then gives you control. So you come here, it says hover over the control tooltip. And then what we need to do is just click on this. And this brings on the map here. Now, if I move this out the way very, very quickly, what you'll see is this is the control here. And this there, you can see the capital's 100% and then it goes away. Now, during the introduction, I said about the problems with playing as Castile. You can see here, at the beginning of the game, the control is very centralized around the capital, and then down here is nothing. This is why I said that playing Castile or Hungary for your first game is not particularly that important, because because we're going to be probably playing for a very relatively short period of time, what you're actually getting, what you're actually going to be playing if you played Hungary would be in that area there, which is just a slightly bigger version of what we've got in Holland here. So that's something. So that is what I wanted to emphasize. And what we're going to do now is just move on. Okay, welcome to the next talking point, which is this diagram here, which shows you the relationship between roads, harbors, proximity, which then feeds into control. And you can see here that it improves crown power. So the more control you've got over an area, the more crown power you've got. It also means that more taxes you draw, and also more importantly, more levies that you can raise as well. So this is a very important diagram. Again, I'd recommend taking a screenshot and then keeping this so to remind you. Although, to be honest, because you'll be doing so much about proximity and control during your first game, especially once you start to expand and conquer, this will come in. This will develop quite quickly. And it comes back to what I was saying in the intro, that you've got to learn these basic mechanics before you can start worrying about anything else like markets and stuff like that. Anyway, so we're just going to click on to here. And what you can see now is the outliner here. It says open the context menu. So, right, what I'm going to do now is just jump forward and I'll see you at the next talking point. Okay, welcome back. We've now reached a very important tool which you will need to use to learn the game, and this is automation. And what the game is going to do, suggested automations. And now, because we're in the walkthrough, the game has actually set a couple of these automatically. Now, there's a couple here which I would strongly recommend switching on for your first playthrough. The first one is close and open buildings. What this is a mechanic where you can stop unprofitable buildings and open them up again once they're profitable. I didn't do this in my first playthrough, and I spent a lot of time fussing around trying to work out which ones were profitable, which ones weren't. And I would recommend that for the first maybe hour or two of your gameplay, is keep this on until you get familiar with the production process. Now, there's one other one's right down the bottom, which is replace generals and replace admirals. This is because if you're going to get into a war and do naval actions, you need to have admirals and generals, and it's just easier to let the game take the strain with respect to replacing those, because there's nothing worse than getting into a battle and you haven't got a general in your army, because that will have a massive detriment to your levies. And now we've got to alerts. One thing I want to stress when it comes to these alerts is don't panic when they're up there. You are not trying to get rid of them all. And if you want to get rid of them, you just right click. So like these ones here, starting device, you can right click and discard them. Now now from left to right, the ones on the left are more serious than the ones in the middle, and the green ones are just purely advisory that I may have overlooked something and you need to take a look at it. But the key factor is do not be paranoid about what these actually mean, to try and get rid of them. For example, this says ship's not repairing. I went through my entire playthrough and I never did anything at all about that, because I didn't know what ships repairing actually meant. And another one here is, where is it? Oh, well, we haven't got any unprofitable buildings at the moment. There we have. We've got unprofitable buildings. This is comes to the automation. If you've got open and closed buildings on, what will happen is that you don't need to do anything with this message, because the AI will decide on which ones of these buildings to open and close. So again, just don't panic too much on that. So let's go to there. The agenda's over here. This is just a series of tips, quite useful to use. But one thing I will say is I strongly recommend you read the starting advice for Holland. Open the agenda, okay. And then we just click that. Now we're going to move to a very important area. We've got to open here. It says open the missions tab. This is the way that you can learn, but it's not just strictly tied to walkthroughs. There is a way in the game settings to switch this on when you do your first full, like say, for example, when you're ready to do your first full-length campaign, you can still switch missions on. Now, the mistake I made with my first playthrough is I selected economy. That was not the best decision. The other thing I would say is don't select military, because you're not going to get in enough wars to actually enjoy this. The one you need to go for is politics. Now what happens next depends on which one of these tabs you select, but the one I would strongly recommend for a first playthrough is politics. The reason for that is that what you get is a little mini tutorial. Now, I am going to do this one simply because I haven't actually done this one here, this walkthrough. So it says here, open the society tab, and it says the people's tab here. And what this does is it shows you the population here. It says here, we're starting now with a politics walkthrough. We'll delve deeper into the complexities of your society, your government and foreign policy. Let us start with the foundation, which is the population. Population is what drives your economy. We've already glimpsed the pops who are living in the capital during the panel, so go through here. So society, and again, this comes back to the fact that in this game you've got culture, religion, social class, and location. And also another key thing that you need to work with is literacy. Literacy will drive your research. So literacy is something that you can't actually avoid. And of course, if your pops get unhappy, they will have a rebellion. It says open the culture tab here. And what you see here is the actual culture that's available within your area here. You can see it's predominantly Lower Franconian. And then we got a few Frisians in 18%. And then what you seem to have is Ashkenazi Jews, which seem to appear everywhere. Now, you can set the tolerance here, but what I would say for your first gameplay is just leave it to what the game's recommended. Works of art is a way that I'm not actually sure what you can improve your primary culture. I'll be completely upfront. In my first playthrough, I did absolutely nothing with works of art. And the same with religion, because I just didn't know how the mechanic works. This is a mechanic that you can ignore completely for your first playthrough. People, now here it says open the characters tab. Now these are the characters in your well, you could say your royal family. In fact, it's got the king at the top. So when you need a character interaction, I think he's the king there because he's got there. You will select characters and manage these characters here, get married. This is where the children will turn up. And the one thing I will say about this characters tab is pay attention to this little icon here. What I will say is that when you are investigating the UI, which is I would strongly recommend you do after finishing this walkthrough, is spend some time moving the cursor around. Another little icon which took me a couple of hours to realize what it is. Whenever you see this icon, it throws out another sub filter. So you can filter by specific, but you can also sub filter. So whenever in the menu system you see this, click on it to see if you can get a sub filter. It's very good when you're looking at the market and production and goods, because you can then work out where certain buildings are. So you go here, open the governments tab, and it says open the country tab. And it says this is your ruler, and this is our ruler. Now rulers have stats across here. They also have these kind of traits which appear. I think they appear over time. And this is so, and as I mentioned before, don't get too invested in your ruler, but you can see there, unfortunately in Holland, this guy's going to die relatively quickly because I think it's actually a game event. Now, this is the cabinet. This is the reason why I was saying that you needed to do the political one first. Now, the cabinet will function without appointing a member. And what you do is there's a whole list of things that you can do which you can use to influence your economy. These down the bottom here aren't available. They can be unlocked later on. Now, the one I'm going, and what you can see is you've got these traits here. So you can use this to manage your actual population. A good one is stabilize your country. Convert provinces is used to assimilate. Strengthen government is another good one. I'll talk a bit more about this once we actually get onto the map here. So this is here. Now, what I will do, though, is come in here. Now, we've got an heir here, which we can appoint to the cabinet. Appointing the royal family to the cabinet will boost your crown authority. So we're going to put him in there. He won't be in there very long, simply because the king's going to die within the first 2 years. But oops, no, sorry about that. But the other thing I will say is that try to avoid putting your aristocracy in. So what I'm going to do, the stats themselves are not that important. Don't be choose your power base over what you would do rather than your thing here. I think we're going to have to be a bit squashed here. Sometimes maybe we've got to compromise here. And what you're looking at for the cabinet, because each one of those cabinet actions use a different stat. So someone like this may look attractive, but really what you want is someone who's a little bit more balanced like that. And then it says government back to estates. It says here, it says open the country tab, government reforms, privileges and laws. Now, so we got estates open here. Laws is over here. Says okay, it says government reforms, and your government reforms are the most defining feature of your country. You're often impacted effects by setting up and should be one of the first things you should do in starting the game. And what you need to do is choose a government reform. The one that I would probably recommend going for to begin with is autocracy, because this gives you more crown power. So if we click that, what you will see now is this will not take effect until the 25th of February 1339, which means it's going to take 2 years to get effect, but it will gradually progress inwards. Let's get rid of these, clear these messages so don't get confused. And what this will do is lift our crown authority to the detriment of everybody else. So government reforms, privileges, I've already allocated one here. I'm not going to allocate any other privileges. The mistake I made was allocating too many, and I upset everything and caused problems. You just got to be very careful, because if you say you want to revoke, and if you watch a lot of tutorials, they will often start by saying get rid of communal lands, because the communal lands move towards decentralization. But now the 1.0.8 update has been released. That is not quite so important. if you're going to go for a very aggressive expansionism, getting decentralization could actually be useful. Privileges, laws, open the laws tab. Now this is the place where you can see your laws, and what you can do is come down here, you can see socio-economic administrative laws. Now these are actually grouped by sections, so if you click on here, what you see is that you get a subset. If you change the law in this area, that this changes. So the subsets change within, like, say for example, legal code. If you change from civil law to traditional law, this will change. This will change correspondingly. Now, what I will say is that changing laws here are very expensive. You don't want to do it that way. What you need to do is through Parliament. So this is open the values tab. Now this screen, just ignore it completely for your first playthrough. This is for very long-term planning into the mid to late game, so just forget it completely. Again, we've got a nice little picture here that shows the relationship. So you can see control increases crown power, privileges decrease crown power, laws and reforms can affect both positively and negatively on the crown power. And then what that does is it improves trade income, cabinet and parliament support. So this is the relationship that you do need to work on. And this is a core mechanic that you do need to kind of get your head round. Diplomacy here, this is the diplomacy screen. By clicking on here, you get an overview of what you got here. So at the moment, we've got one subject of Zealand here. Go back to here. We've got trade access to the markets, and we've got no rivals selected at the moment. So we're just going to skip over that. It says current relations. This, yeah, well, I've just told you that. It says known countries. This is a little bit much. So again, what you really need to do is use the filters. So you can say who are our neighbours, who's in the same region. This makes it more manageable. Who hates us, who likes us. Very powerful filter, certainly worth using. Organizations, open the organizations tab. Again, for your first playthrough, I never used it. None of this really means much to me, so just ignore it. Foreign countries, zoom out to see a foreign country. It says open the, and what you can do here is by left clicking on, say we left click on France. What this does is it opens up France. Across the top here, it tells you whether their opinion of us, whether they trust us, favors, whether we've got a spy network there, and whether we can create a casus belli. And then what you've got here is all the diplomatic actions, and you can also see down this side what their political relationships are, who they're at war with, who their allies. Very important when you're planning a war to know that the person you're going to attack, whether they've got allies, because when the game says, oh, they're inferior to you, what the game doesn't take into account is the allies. Diplomatic actions here was a whole load of them: friendly, hostile. So, oops, it says click to prove. Oh, great. What I'm going to do is skip that lesson. Actually, we'll go back. Okay, we'll do it properly. It says here. No, we're just going to open the diplomatic thing. Where is it? Diplomacy. Who we actually? Let me just do this very quickly. Open country panel, diplomatic actions, and we will be improving our relationship with France and England. You do this as Holland simply because, actually, if you go back, what it will do is it will suggest improve there. The reason I'm doing this is that you want to keep France and England happy so they don't decide to attack you. It says open the government tab, and then we're back to the missions tab again. It says start the political mission. And what we do now is click on this. What this does is it actually activates the mission, and it says create a cabinet. So it says here have at least 2 cabinet actions. I'll just do this one very, very quickly. So we come into country, cabinet, and what I'll probably do, just you can change these as quickly as you want. I'll set you to develop South Holland because that's our capital. And then what we will do is encourage migration. You can't do the same action twice in this work province. Stabilize the country. We'll just do that. You can see down here the trait that you actually need. Okay, so we're now on the map. We've done the first actual task, and the second one is meritocracy. Enact government reforms. Okay, we've done this one already. So if we go back to the missions, open this up, what you do is you just click on this now. Oh, is it? There. So what we've done so far is created a royal authority, enact government reforms, and I think we can get another quick win if we go to country, cabinet. Now it says appoint a private head of the cabinet. You only really want to use this if it's a member of your family, so we can do that. And what that does is it now fills that. Okay, so we've now done that. So we've done this one. The next thing is we need to increase cabinet efficiency. This is a time dependent task, so that's it. So we're now finally on the map. And if you do the walkthrough, this is the point where you drop a save, take a break. And in the last part of the video, I'll just give you a quick overview of what's going on in Holland and just talk a little bit about starting structures. And to be honest, I need a short break for a cup of coffee. So I'll see you in a minute. Okay, welcome back. I feel slightly rejuvenated after that long session in the walkthrough. Now, what I'm going to do in this final part, I don't want it to be too long, and I'm not going to talk about the details of how to play. That's something that you need to evolve over time. What I want to do is start by giving you the timescale, because of course in the introduction I said that you're not going to play for the whole game. You're probably going to play the first 40, 50 years. If I let the game run speed 3, but bear in mind that you would normally stay paused because I want to see if the first event will trigger. Now the way that the game will shape up is that eventually this leader will die and then we will lose our cabinet leader. But of course you can see we skipped over that mission that we did. Then what will happen is you get a period of time to build up your economy. And what you're really waiting for to begin with is actually your first parliament. Now, the first parliament should be, if we come into here, it will be called 2 years ago. So we've got about 2 years to go to get to our first parliament. Now, in the first parliament, if we, I can leave it on pause to be honest. Let's just get rid of those things again. The first parliament, what you will want to do is fabricate a casus belli. Now, the mistake I made in my game is that I went the spy network approach to get a casus belli. The trouble is that it's a very long, time-consuming process because you've got to build up, I think it's 20 spy score against Utrecht, because Utrecht's going to be our first target. Then you've got to select the casus belli. And the casus belli you get is humiliate your rival, because of course what we would do is immediately set Utrecht as a rival. Now the problem with that is that the actual casus belli that you can get is not particularly very good, and it's got limitations on it in the sense that you can't actually get, even with 100% war score, you can't achieve the first real goal that you need, which is to occupy these two locations which you're going to integrate into North Holland. And also, if I zoom out, you can see you can get this area, and what you do is you make this into a vassal. And the key is that you need to do this relatively quickly, because if we go in, if I click on Utrecht for the moment, just go in here and click on them, you You see, at the moment they like us, so what you got to do is make them a rival, so they're unhappy with us. You get more benefits, they're unhappy, but you can also see that if we, let's do it this way, just keep it simple. Whoops, no, come on, game. We go to diplomatic actions and go to hostile actions. We go to declare war. You'll see that it says we are stronger than them, and at the moment they've got no allies, but they will get a couple of allies, but they're often quite small. And you can take out Utrecht even with a couple of allies. But the key factor is to get that first Casus Belli in 2 years' time, and then go to war and conquer this land. And that's also going to be your first practice war. It's a fairly straightforward, nice way introduction to actually fighting wars, because you're going to fight with a single group of troops. One tip I will say, like many major events in this game, drop a save before you start, so that if it's your first war and you're not sure about the war mechanics, it means if it all goes wrong, then you can just go back and redo it. But what you should end up, if you get the Casus Belli from the Parliament, not by using the spy network, you will then end up with having these two locations to add to North Holland, and your vassal out here, which comes back to control, because over here, if I show you the control at the moment, if we go to control, I show you Utrecht, you can see Utrecht's got a massive control problem at the moment, simply because out here they've got nothing, because this is how control can work against you if you don't have contiguous things, because simply because Utrecht can't reach these provinces anyway. So from Utrecht, you can see that the control in here is quite low, 14, 44. That one's a bit better because it's got a sea connection. Spreading control by sea is quite a thing. In fact, I can show it to you very, very quickly. If I show you proximity, if you click on something like this, you will see the path that things travel between these two areas here. Say Amsterdam, you see that's by road, this is by sea. If you go to Horn, it goes out through here. So there is a mechanic that you can do almost from the get-go, which you can do. That is what you want to do, is pick up the little navy here, send them out here and tell them control the seas. And what you can do is click on these four. They tend to come up groups of 4. This is all one area, and what that navy will do once it gets into position is improve the control access through here. See, at the moment where we've got a maritime presence of 49%, which actually gives us a little bit more control from this area here. But of course, eventually other navies will turn up and compete for that access. So that's the first thing you want to do from the get-go. Get that done, prepare for the first war. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the actual, is markets. If I show you the market, we don't own the market. Now, one of the first mistakes I made is I assumed that these markets were static and predefined. They're not. They're dynamic. You can even create your own market. And the important thing to know about these markets is that, one, that they are dynamic, and more importantly, they act as a central distribution for your economy. So every location is a member of a market. If we zoomed right out, you'd see them all the way across the map. Many countries, like say for Castile down here, have 2 markets, which is another reason why you don't really want to start in Castile for your first playthrough. The significance of the fact that every location is a member of a market, and this is an early mistake I made, which I didn't really understand, and it took me a couple of hours to understand, is that, say for example, we click on here, up there, it's got to Den Haag. This is a good example. In Den Haag, we produce dyes which can be used by the actual by the Tailors Guild. Now, my assumption when I first started playing is that the dies produced here would be available to the tailor in this location because they're both in the same location. It doesn't work like that. What it actually does is the dies produced are sold to the market, and then the tailors buy the input for the dies. So like these, whoops, go back. The game can be a little bit. So these dies are purchased from the market. So just because you build a tailor in here, this is the mistake I made. Just because you've got a tailor here doesn't mean they've got exclusive access to those actual dies. But there is an advantage that you can do. If we come back to here and come here, if we look into here, what you will see is that there is a proximity bonus that you can get by using the dies. You can see at the bottom it says dies in South Holland. That means you can get a proximity bonus by having dies in your pricing, but the price is still controlled by the good going to the market and coming back. That also applies to food, which is something that is way beyond this video. Now, the one thing I will show you is that if we come into the economy, open up the market, what I suggest you do is that you can see that is you actually automate. Oh, this is actually automated at a higher level. But what I will show you is if we come into actually do it this way. One thing about this game is there's about 5 different ways to do anything. Now, if you look in the bottom panel, you can see that at the moment we've got 9% trade advantage. That means that the country of Flanders, which actually owns the market, gets priority with the goods. Therefore, just because we're in the market and there is fine cloth available, if you come in here, in the case of dies, Flanders gets first purchase of the dies they need, then we get second purchase. So trade advantage is really good. Now, if you own the market, then you've got the natural trade advantage. But if you're sharing a market and you're second, that will explain why certain and this is why you can get buildings which will, even though they're efficient, they're actually says that they're operating at 50% due to lacking wool. So obviously this is running on the wool production method because it can't get the dies. That's a very important thing you need to do. And the market is totally separate from trading. This is done automatically. Now, you don't see it if you look at the trading side. And this is something that is very important that you understand. So just to round this section off, and I'm also aware that the video is probably going on a lot longer than I originally intended, is that to begin with, what you want to do is use your money here, but don't blow it all completely, to build up your RGOs. This will provide a very important source of money. Also, Holland suffers from food shortages. So one area where you may want to kind of improve it, to upgrade an RGO, you just click on it, is to start producing fish. Now, fish is not a food, but it's not a food from the market point of view. An RGO produces 5 food, which is separate from the actual trade good, which is fish. So if you come down here, it says at the moment there is an excess of supply in the fish, but that is a trade good as opposed to the food itself. So it's so fishes are not food and a food, and that's the way you've got to look at it. And of course, your balance here will decide on how well the price will actually move. In fact, if we come here and go to the price, what you'll get is a breakdown, and every RGO resource has what's called a base price. And what you can see at the moment is that because there's an oversupply of fish in the market, what you see is that the price is drifting down towards 0.93. Oh, hopefully that makes sense. Now, just to finish off, I just want to talk about 2 things which I may cause concern, especially if you watch the tutorial. First is the Black Death. Now, the Black Death will show up in about 1345. Before 1345, don't kind of concentrate too much on building up buildings. Go with what's there, build up your RGOs, and then of course the thing I did forget to mention, which is we go to here, it's in here somewhere. But if you've got the money, is build a few marketplaces. Don't go overboard, just get a couple in each one. What the marketplaces does is improve your trade advantage, which then improves your more access to the actual market, the Bruges market. Up until the Black Death, that's basically what you want to do, is build up your RGOs, come to terms with managing your economy, and then the Black Death will hit. Hopefully by then you would have probably have Utrecht and under your control as a subject. There's also a possibility that you may get Frisia up here as well. But if you do get the opportunity to conquer Frisia, make it a vassal. And then the Black Death will hit and you will lose a big proportion of your population. But it sounds terrifying, but everyone's going to get subject. So you've got to look at it as a great equalizer. Then after the Black Death is finished, there will be quite a long period while you rebuild your populations. And it's during that period where you start going through in detail, looking at your buildings in here and deciding where you want things to be profitable. Don't be frightened of the Black Death. In fact, I've just remembered one other building that if the money's flowing that you can build, and that is the scriptorium. The books are a fairly profitable item to build. If in fact I can come up here, you can see you get 5 ducats for books. But the thing about books is that as long as you've got them, you can get the materials to build them. There's never a massive oversupply in books, because as the game progresses, that's more. So it's very good to, if you get the money to build a scriptorium, which technically we could. So if you just come in here, build a scriptorium, in the long term, be quite a regular profit income that you can actually learn to develop. Now, just to wind up, I just want to talk about one other thing, is that so far our leader hasn't died. He died within the first couple of months when my playthrough. Eventually he will die, and then the heir will leave the cabinet. And then what will happen is and he will most likely be alive when you go into the Black Death. What could happen is if you don't protect the leader, there are mechanics in the Black Death. Again, when you get the notification for the Black Death, is the 100 Years' War. That's just between France and England. When you get the notification for the Black Death, it doesn't mean it's actually in your area. What you will get is a map to tell you where it's spreading from. That's the point to drop a save. Drop a save straight away so that you can see the spread of the Black Death. Then when the Black Death actually does arrive at Holland, you'll be given a number of decisions to make. The one I strongly recommend is that you isolate the royal family in order to prevent your new king here, and in order to prevent your heir who's become king from dying. Because if he dies, what will happen is that you will end up in a regency, and a regency is a real good way to damage your economy. Again, this is one of the things that you do need to kind of consider, is the fact that you get these messages in here, and for the first playthrough you don't really understand how things are going. What you need to be aware of is just take the time to read them, because this is actually granting a privilege. It says elaborate court. And now this one isn't too bad actually, because what it does is it gives monthly progress towards individualism, and it gives expected court cost to court of 1. And it says cultural influence plus 20. Now that could be quite good, but what you'll see is it gives a little bit more happiness, but it also gives a 20% shift in the estate power towards the aristocracy. I think I will accept that actually, because I don't really want to lose the estate 20% estate satisfaction. Because if we come over here, let me just try and explain it. If we go to the estates, at the moment we've got 48% estate satisfaction. So at the moment our aristocracy are moving towards their satisfaction equilibrium. Now, if we accept this, that will knock that back to there, and then what the nobility will get a thing. So we will accept that, and you can see it's now appeared in here, but it will take a little while to take effect. And what you will see is that Now the month is rolled over. You can see that the power shift has changed. The aristocracy have gained power. So that is something you need to do. But returning to the results of the Black Death, that's when you redevelop your policy. Now, there's one other thing that will turn up. I'm not sure if it's triggered by the death of the heir or whether it's a programmed event. And this is called the Hook and Cod War. Now, the first thing you want to be aware about is this is not a war, but what it will do is have a massive impact on your stability, and it will impact your economy. So, and what you've got to do is keep answering events to get to 20 points. So what I would suggest is when that trick kicks off, if it kicks off, I'm not convinced it always kicks off, is what you do is you choose a side and then you answer the events to build up to 20. And then when it ends, it just passes over. So there's one final point, which is research. Now, what I suggest when you actually play is go into the research tree. Oh, they've actually fixed the zoom. The zoom is here. Now, you start in the Age of Traditions. As Holland, most of the research here is already completed. The reason for that is that this is used to balance games. So if you decided to start as a Native American tribe in the New World, which you can do if you want to, what you will do is you will have a lot more research to do here before you come in here. But as Holland, we've only got one research tree. What you can do is, if you don't really want to do anything, what you can say is, right, do that. What this will do is you can get to an endpoint, and what you're doing. I really hate the zoom on this game. The game will work down this tree to this and do 4 researches. This dotted line here represents an institution which we haven't absorbed, because this relates to China or the East. So if you start in the East, there's a good chance this will be unlocked, but you may not have other things unlocked here. Now, I'm just going to go to the Age of Renaissance. The Age of Renaissance comes in 1437, not 1437. The Age of Renaissance comes in 1342 when the Age of Traditions goes. So you can see we've got 6 traditions here. But when this comes in, there's only one research tree that's open by default. And then what you've got to do is get these institutions into your country. These spread across the map. So as these are triggered, it tells you where it starts from. Now, that is something that's way beyond the scope of this video. So at the beginning, just do the research, what you actually want to do, and then see how it goes from there. I finally got to the end. Hopefully I haven't fried your brain. If you have any questions or problems, feel free to put it in the description and I'll try and answer those questions. The final point I will say is that when you get to somewhere where you're not certain, like starting a war, a key decision which may have a bit of a problem, or something you don't understand, that's the point to drop a save. Anyway, this is where I'm going to leave it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you found it interesting. And until next time, whatever you do, enjoy your gaming.